Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Digital Leadership Briefing, a series of webinars introducing you as digital professionals to ideas, tools, and techniques that help you strategize and execute. My name is Theo Paraskevopoulos, and I'm Chief Executive at Growcreate. In the webinar today, we will discuss measuring success in the context of engineering teams. How can you, as a technical leader, ensure that your team is performing at its best? Now, Growcreate is about 75% developers, so this subject is always front of mind for us. Dev team performance, in other words, is company performance. Also, under our .c brand, we provide support and expertise to other agencies. Team performance is even more complex when developers are not even part of the same company. And although this briefing today is primarily for CTOs, lead devs, and technical leaders, the session contains lessons for business and marketing professionals as well. But simply, your strategies are executed by developers, so fostering a performant team is important. So how can you be confident that your development team is operating at its full potential? For this briefing, we partner with Adadot, a performance analytics platform. With us today is Alex Harris. Alex is Adadot CEO, who will show us how to use data signals to evaluate team success, look out for signs of inefficiency, and how to create strategies to enhance collaboration and output. Alex, welcome to the briefing. Before we get stuck in, tell us a little bit about yourself and Adadot.
Lovely. Thank you for the lovely intro, Theo. I'm Alex. I'm one of the two co-founders of Adadot. And essentially, the way Adadot was born is that we were working with our own in-house developer team. We wanted to help our own developers essentially help themselves, right? So it was a way to understand what's going on, how to remove blockages, how to make their lives a little bit easier. And that's how the tool was born. What it is at the moment, it's essentially an analytics tool, as Theo already mentioned. And the point of Adadot is to help bring balance in the working life of developers. So we don't just look at very basic metrics, we look at everything holistically, and you'll see why that matters very, very shortly. And with that, I'm just going to start the presentation. So since a lot of you might be tech leads, CTOs, etc., you might have found yourselves in the past in a bit of an awkward position in a boardroom, trying to explain why marketing comes with their own numbers, sales comes with their own numbers, but engineering is a bit of a black box at the moment. And there's a very good reason for that. Engineering is traditionally hard to measure or basically put a stamp as to what good looks like. First and foremost, because it's a very broad subject. The factors that affect engineering input, output are very, very complex. And that brings me to the next point of complexity, because there's not just a single framework across the industry that helps you understand what good process looks like. There's Kanban, there's Agile. In fact, 21 official frameworks are out there, and every team creates their own flavor. The third thing is, when it comes to understanding efficiency and effectiveness of an engineering team, you have to bring your developers with you in that journey. You have to have metrics that are adoptable for your engineers. You can't just do something by yourself and then expect that to live in a vacuum. So that's why it's been very, very hard to do that in the past. And this is why the industry is still in the early adoption phase of engineering metrics. It's not a mainstream thing that every single team out there is going to be using. So just by being here and listening to us, you're already in the forefront of the industry and how it's growing at the moment. And that's not for lack of trying. There's been a lot of effort in the past to create those metrics and get them universally accepted. So for 70 years, developer teams have been trying to create that, what good looks like. And in 1950, for example, you had slog. In 1990, you had the introduction of straightforward engineering metrics like velocity and cycle time. And in 2023, you had the likes of Dora, Space, and DevX coming into play. Now, you have all of this effort, but at the same time, we have to understand that a lot of what these metrics have been in the past is lagging indicators. So if you're looking, for example, to measure how many bugs are being created and are being resolved, your issue might be somewhere actually much earlier in the process. So if there's bad code, it might be, for example, because your developers are in meetings constantly and they don't have enough time to think and create. So that's one issue. And the second issue is that developers are actually doing a lot more than just writing code. In fact, it's only 10 to 20% of a developer's time that is being spent in writing code purely. And there's all of these other things that developers are doing. So this is why it's been traditionally very, very hard to understand as a space. Now, we do things a little bit differently. So to address the issue of what everything else the developer is doing apart from coding, as a tool, we take data from as broad of a number of sources as we can. So you have not just coding tools like GitHub and GitLab, but you also have project management tools like Jira, Google Workspace, Outlook, and Slack. We plug into these tools and we get signals that then allow us to present data in front of the team of developers, help them understand where they're spending their time. That off the back of it helps us to create recommendations as to what are the key areas that can be improved. And then finally reward the developers through badges, make it a little bit more gamey. And that essentially helps close the circle between data, insight, recommendation, and reward so that the good behavior gets promoted through the team. You then have a set here of questions that helps us understand some of the key questions that we can answer through the platform. So for individual contributors, you might be looking to figure out, am I visible enough in the team? Am I building the right habits as a junior developer? How well am I managing my focus time? And for managers, it could be the likes of, are we investing the right amount of effort on the right things? What is impacting our velocity? What's the cost and of resource allocation of how we're spreading essentially the work. And in the past, we had situations where the developer team of a customer was separate with the QA team. So were there any issues, let's say there, from delays between handovers? So those are some of the key things. Now, with that, what we're going to do is show
So
you.
before we get into the demo, let's just to ask you a question there, just to clarify this. So there are benefits to using the metrics both for the engineers, for the team members, but also for the team lead. So in some ways, to improve the team performance, it's not just measuring it and managing it better or designing it better, but it is also incentivizing and even inspiring your engineering team to be more visible, to kind of contribute more.
Yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about before, that things need to be adopted by the developers themselves. One key thing to mention here is that we are very much privacy first, so we don't show developer data to their manager directly. So there's a very much aggregate data. The developer themselves will have the ability to look at their own stats, but it's not something that the manager can see, and everything is aggregated at the team level. This is again important because going back to that adoption point, you know, anything that you bring into the team needs to be loved by the developers themselves. You shouldn't be
If the
imposing things.
developers if the developers feel that they're being, that there is some snooping happening over there, that they might
Yeah,
not use it, right? It might impact adoption. Very good,
exactly.
thank you.
And they're smart people. And the thing is you want to create a motion where everybody's rowing in the same direction as a team. You know,
Hmm.
everybody should be working together in the same goals. Not like one person is doing X, the other one is doing Y. So that's why it's important to have everybody on board for the journey. Um, I'm going to start with the executive overview. And what that is a very kind of top line way for executives such as yourself to figure out very quickly what are the bigger movers and shakers. And we do this by splitting a lot of the data that we see in three key pillars. So you have investment. This is how much work, code days, for example, is being put in. You then have your delivery, which basically shows what is the output of said work.
Mhm.
And then that would be your throughput, that would be your lead time, what is being created. And then finally, you have the things that you need to use to balance some of these metrics. So for example, if your team is sprinting and they're really rushing to create a feature, are you creating a situation where the long working hours are very much present? And in, let's say, a couple of weeks, you're going to be looking at a huge number of bugs coming out of this because you overworked your developers. So that's what
Mm.
the third pillar is for. The third pillar is for balance. The third pillar is to help you balance out some of the things you might be doing over in the other two. And this goes back to what we talked about before. Developers don't just
Hmm.
write code. They do a number of other things, right? So that's why you need to have a good visibility on that.
Absolutely.
Um, the other thing to mention here in this instance is that these metrics, you want to look at them over a period of time. You want to give them maybe 6 months. I mean, obviously you can always go into like smaller amounts of time. You can change that here, but we do recommend looking at a 6 month horizon, because there's going to be ups and downs naturally that happens. So you want to be looking at the bigger trend. Is overall the accuracy of planning increasing, or are we basically going backwards? So those are some of the things. Now, this is at the executive level. We talked about taking your developers with you in that journey. So what you need to do for that, you need to make sure that each team has data that they're able to work with
Hmm.
every time they do a retro. So so you're able to keep the needle moving in every 2 weeks, every retro, every planning meeting, and everything is data driven, not just perception driven. So
That
looking
is a very
at
important point, by the way, just to there's a pause there. Everything being data driven rather than perception driven. I think that's something that's going to stick there, because in many cases, especially as in leadership, we kind of we find ourselves making decisions based on what you call perception, like having an impression that things happen in a certain way. Having data to back up certain decisions, of course, it is absolutely invaluable.
I think to give you a couple of real examples, in our own team, we had a case where we thought we were doing so much work, we're sprinting really fast, we were like doing the task so quickly in one sprint in particular, and then we looked at the data, and what we had done was essentially back weighted most of the work. So we
Hmm.
had we had 3 or 4 days where everybody was just working like crazy, and we thought had produced so much output in that sprint. In reality, it was pretty much the same output in that sprint, and the sprint before, and the sprint before that. So that's a good example. I have another example, and I think I'm going to talk about it later, when I show you the actual data, whereby a team used this tool in particular to advocate for themselves, because they had a lot of friction between the engineering team and the QA team, which was separate.
Hmm.
But the code was getting stuck in the handover between them. So it was creating a massive amount of friction, and they were able to use this data to understand it. So I was talking about team data. This is where you go a level below,
Hmm.
and you look at the detail of what is happening in your task management system. It could be Jira, it could be Notion. Are you spending way too much time on bugs versus features? Are you, for example, deploying as frequently as you want to? Are your pipelines working properly? And where is your code getting stuck? Is it getting stuck in progress? Is it getting stuck in the review stage? This is the customer I just mentioned earlier. And is your review process running efficiently? Because things might be getting all good, like everything is fine, pipelines, everything is fine, and then you get to the review and the reviews are not happening. And we actually did have a customer where they changed their policy, to make sure that reviews were happening within 24 hours, because they saw that they were getting stuck. We
Hmm.
spoke about other things that developers are doing as well, right? We spoke about collaboration they might be doing,
Yeah.
different
You
amount
have a
of
good name
times.
for that. Do you call it a glue time? Is it
Glue time, yeah. Glue
yeah.
time is the thing that makes everything come together. Quite
Hmm.
literally, that's why it's called the glue time. Um, and the way glue time works is it's the component that helps your team work better, that helps your code actually be bug free. Because if you have developers who are talking to each other, if you have junior developers that are actually collaborating with somebody senior and checking their ideas and making sure they're doing those check-ins frequently enough, then when you look at your bugs, you're going to have fewer. And we know this, again, having a developer team ourselves. We actually had a junior guy, who would just go off and do things by themselves, and then when they would check back in after a few days, the seniors would be like pulling their hair out, like, why did you go with this solution? So we figured out that was the reason why, through looking at data and through looking
Hmm.
how they were collaborating. So we fixed that over time.
I
So
like that.
that's
I like the fact that by calling it glue time, you kind of reframe what we in leadership sometimes think of it as wasted time. Or developer is not in the zone, is not writing enough code. But in fact, this is far from being wasted time. this is, as you reframed, this the thing that makes it all come together?
Well, it's two things. It could be wasted time if it's basically used badly, if there's meetings
Fair
for the
enough.
sake of having meetings, or if there's meetings that are disruptive to focus time. And in fact, let me quickly show you what that is. So
Exactly.
if let's say you've scheduled 2, 3 hours, maybe 1 hour, doesn't matter how much, but if you schedule a bit of time that's protected in your developers' calendars for them to sit down, write code, process their ideas, then you're off to a winning start. Because in a lot of teams we found that doesn't happen, or when it does happen, they get somebody walks over, somebody pings a note on Slack, somebody will say, "Oh, can you just," and it just gets basically broken up, and it's very, very hard to refocus. Developers might know this as context switching. So you basically,
Yep.
the more of that you have, the more fragmentation you have. This is why we have this chart up here, the harder it becomes to actually come up with good solutions.
So the
Um,
lesson here seems to be glue time is good, but it should be concentrated, leaving enough time or plenty of uninterrupted focus time.
it should be deliberate. This is the bit that
Thank you.
we're very insistent on. You, you know, if there's focus time, it needs to be used as focus time. If it's something else, it needs to be used as something else. And this is why it's
Exactly.
important to be data driven, because unless you have data, it's very, very hard to be deliberate. If you're going with how, like, finger in the air, oh, I think we had too many meetings this week, not only is it harder to figure out if that's indeed the case, but also it's much harder to advocate for your team and go to somebody. Maybe if you need to have a conversation with somebody at a different level, maybe in the board, and say, guys, like, we really, really need to be able to focus, or my developers are overworked, we need to hire a few more. These conversations are really, really hard to have on gut alone. Whilst if you have the
Indeed.
data, you can go, hey, yo, like, our developers have been working a ton of out of hours, this last 3 months. We are seeing that our bugs are in fact increasing because of that, of said overwork. What can we do about it? And you can make that case. Um, so I mean, I
Very good.
mentioned a number of metrics. You can, when you're on the platform, you can very easily kind of make everything custom and kind of create personal dashboards and stuff like that. So all of this can be personalized, and this can be created in a way that fits each team and each process. Because as we said earlier, all of these are different. So we've seen this in action now. What I would like to do is sort of open up the floor for any questions people might have.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Alex, for that. So if any of you who are watching have got any questions, please type them into the Q&A. In the meantime, I should have got quite a few questions, so let's start with these and see anything comes along the way. So Alex, this being incredibly interesting, very useful. Great to see, the two sides, both from a developer, from a team member perspective, and from a leadership perspective. But how do we start? What do we bring forward to the team to get going?
So I would say there's three key things to understand, and especially the first one and the last one are really key. So I would say look where no one is looking. So I would start with the most interesting kind of data sets, which are the softer bits, which are the non-engineering metrics, because that's going to give you a much better idea of what is affecting your lagging indicators, which are indeed your engineering metrics. The second
Mhm.
thing is be as data-driven as possible. And I'm going to be a bit contrarian here and say, because we spoke about perceptions earlier, I would say you don't completely disregard qualitative data. Survey your developers, speak to your developers, and see how these things match up to the quantitative data as much as you can do that. So be as data driven as possible here. It means also understand opinions, also speak to your guys. And the third thing is focus on momentum. And it kind of, I have there not just perceptions, because I'm referring to the to our own case that I mentioned earlier. What I mean here specifically is don't just take a metric and kind of despair and look at, oh my God, like, we're so slow or we have so
Mhm.
many bugs. The point here is the direction of travel. is this improving? If it's improving
Mm.
and it is consistently improving, I can tell you one thing, as somebody who has studied statistics to a large extent, um, the direction of travel and the momentum is much more important because it compounds over time. This is how compound interest works.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
You
if
build on it,
if
right? Yeah.
100%, because like if you look at sports statistics, for example, one of the most consistent like predictors of success is consistency. If somebody is improving consistently, they're going to continue improving and that will compound over time. So I would say that's one of the most important things to focus on. So these
Okay.
are the three things that's where to start. And then we have a few more data points here, a few more points around kind of
Yeah,
how
let's look
to
into the data
improve it.
points, especially on the metrics. Especially somebody from an engineering team kind of was asking me pretty much exactly that. We're doing quite a lot of work with KPIs and stuff of
Hmm.
late. So an idea, what is a good metric? And probably conversely, what is a bad metric? What is a non-helpful metric perhaps would probably help? And
I'm
look at
gonna
that, you have a
start
slide
with
for that.
yeah, I was it's almost I've done this presentation before. So we use this by the way, guys, for workshops. So these are questions that have come up before from teams. So it's handy to have something that you can also look at. So what we look for when it comes to metrics, I would say one thing you absolutely need to avoid is Goodhart's law. It's kind of focusing on things that don't matter and kind of
Mm.
pointing arrows in directions that make no sense. So the first thing I would say is work with equilibriums and restraints. Remember when I was showing you the three key pillars before, and I said, this is your input, this is your output, and the third column has to do with how you balance the other two. So, these are the things like, making sure your developers are not overworked, making sure you're not over optimizing for something at the expense of something else. Because these are the things you're going to pay for later down the line. This is what you have to be very, very careful with that. Then the other thing is work smart. I'm pretty sure everybody has heard of SMART goals, but part of a SMART goal is that it's measurable, and it's timely, it's timed. So always make sure that you have elements of how am I going to measure this goal instead of just creating a goal and then going, yeah, it would be really nice if we could, I don't know, put code into production faster, but then you have no way of measuring that. That's not a goal. That's wishful thinking. That's a hope. And then the third thing, which I think most teams forget, is aligned to business goals. You need to have buy-in by the guys above you. Because if you're working towards, let's say, reducing the amount of bugs in your code, but leadership says, wait a minute, I don't care about that. I actually care about shipping that feature faster. I don't care if it breaks. Not often, not often the situation you're going to find yourselves in. Still, people will still care if it breaks, especially if you're in a regulated industry. But as an extreme example, you could be working towards one thing and your leadership and your whole business could be working towards another thing. And technical debt is actually a very good example for this. You could be solving for technical debt, but the team, the business wants to move at a different direction. Um, so that's something to be aware of. I'm quickly then going to say there's definitely such a thing as bad metrics. Like, do
Mhm.
not fool yourself to think that any metric is a good metric. I mean, I mentioned the ship faster just earlier, or, things like lines of code. It's completely irrelevant at the end of the day how many lines of code you have, unless you specifically need to measure for some reason, which I still haven't come across as to why you do that. So there is such thing as bad metrics. Make sure you avoid them. Um, Here is an example of how you can set a metric up. So it's like I want to decrease X whilst maintaining Y during this time frame. So here's an example of how this would look like. In the next 2 months, I want to reduce my time steam to review to 24 hours. That's your metric, whilst maintaining current focus time at 2 hours per day. Right? Because if you think about it, you can't expect people to pick up code for review faster if they don't have time to do that. Right?
Correct.
And this is an actual example from an actual client, and they put that to work. Um, so, I mean, you can go and do something more strategic as well. You can say, in the next 2 months, I want to reduce my team's lead time to 5 days. So that's a longer horizon. Once maintaining a current, a 30% code rework rate. So, and you can layer metrics up as well. So this is a bit more complex, but for people who work with OKRs specifically, you have
Yep.
your objectives, you have your
Kind
key
of like
results, right?
layering or prioritizing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. In the
exactly.
meantime, we have got a question from the audience. What measurable outcomes have teams seen after using Adadot? For example, in velocity, engagement, or well-being, specifically on return on investment. How do we sell this to the leadership team?
Yeah, so this vastly depends on the team and what they have prioritized. So, I
Mhm.
mean, I gave a couple of examples before. One case was, for example, a team wanted to make sure that they can reduce the amount of time it took for code to
Mhm.
go through QA, specifically because they were handling a political situation internally, and they wanted to make sure that they don't get stuck with a QA team. That was one specific example. We have another team which operates in a very regulated industry. So they had to rework how the process works between them and compliance
Mhm.
because everything had to go through compliance for them, right? So for them, it was about making sure that the process of handover between a team to another was much faster. And also, in their case, they were using the data to understand how if the meetings were done in an efficient way between the teams. There was a
Okay.
different team. They specifically wanted to ensure like their lead time was a bit better than before. So they very much aligned their metrics to help them with that. So there's not one size fits all. It depends on what
Mhm.
and this is why I mentioned earlier about aligning with the business, aligning with the
Indeed.
overall goals of what the team is trying to achieve.
Mhm. Okay. Maybe we've got time for the one last question that I see here. Are there different levels of access for developers, for operations, for the C-suite or leadership? I mean, you imply that there is different features designed for different
Mhm.
personas, but there is different levels of access within the application as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We keep on purpose the data access quite flat and transparent. So that means that a developer can go back to the screen I showed you earlier, which is very top line metrics, they're a bit longer horizon, and also the CTO can specifically look at one team if they want to. So that's kind of a flat level of data access. What I would say is we have a minimum number of people that you need to have in a team to be able to look at that data. So you have minimum
Mhm.
of 3 people. That's again to aggregate say data so that you can still maintain a level of privacy. But most teams are happy with that because it creates a level of, as I've mentioned, like equality and transparency. So if a
Mhm.
developer wants to look at planning accuracy over the last 6 months, they have that data in hand, and
Okay.
they feel like they can access it.
Yes. Great stuff. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you much for your insights, Alex. It was great having you on the webinar. And thank you everyone for attending the Digital Leadership Briefing. We hope that you gain an understanding on why engineering performance matters and how to use metrics to measure it and to ensure success. If you're interested in implementing Adadot as a solution, or if you need help with DevOps, with Azure, or with 24/7 support, please reach out to us directly or schedule a call via our website. Many thanks for your attention, and we hope to see you again on the next briefing. Have a nice afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Speak, yeah.